Hey guys, it's Mrs. Yeagle, and I'm reading chapter 23 of Addison Cooke and the Tomb of the Khan. This chapter starts on page 237, and the title is The Pig's Whistle, which is good because that's a chapter title that's easy for me to say. So, here comes The Pig's Whistle, chapter 23. Addison rushed back to the collapsing corridor. He paused to stretch his hamstrings and limber up. Everybody ready? Molly, Raj, and Eddie nodded somberly. Addison stepped into the chamber, and nothing happened. Excellent. Maybe the trap can only be triggered on the other side. Still, just to be safe, nobody touch anything. Halfway through the tunnel, just when it took a sharp left turn, they heard an awful rumbling, and the ceiling began its slow descent. Addison broke into a sprint. "I didn't touch anything!" Eddie shouted. "Then who did?" Addison rounded the next turn and skidded to a halt. Boris Rhaegar stood in the passage, staring in bewilderment at the lowering ceiling. Addison noted that Boris was wearing new pants. Scruffy wool pants. "Somewhere in Kashgar, there's a shepherd who wants his pants back," said Addison. The second Boris laid eyes on Addison's team, he seemed to forget about the ceiling problem entirely. He attacked with a growl of rage. Addison saw no way around Boris. The broad-shouldered man blocked the passage entirely. Addison turned and fled back the way they'd come, Raj, Molly, and Ed scurrying ahead of him. To his horror, he saw the final stone door grinding its way closed. Only Eddie managed to escape through the door before it slammed shut. Ducking low, Addison wheeled to face Boris. As much as he loved exploring archaeological sites, Addison discovered that there were any number of places he would rather be than trapped in a homicidal hallway with a raging psychopath. Boris, seeing the passage door sealed shut, seemed to have his first inkling that something was horribly wrong. He was already bending double under the lowering ceiling, his head crooked at an odd angle. He bellowed and charged at Addison like a feral boar. Somehow, Addison got the distinct impression that Boris blamed him for the collapsing ceiling. He ducked and dodged Boris's bear-like paws in the narrow tunnel, but with each passing second, he had less and less room to maneuver. "Eddie, pull the lever!" Eddie's voice traveled back through the stone door. "I can't! It's inside a skull!" "Please, Eddie, get us out of here." Addison did not like to issue orders or even raise his voice, but desperate times, desperate measures. "I can't see what's inside the skull. If a spider bites my fingers, I can't practice piano." "If I get out of here," shouted Addison, "I'll bite your fingers." "Well, then why would I free you?" Addison crouched on all fours as the ceiling clamped down on him like a garlic press. Realizing he had bigger problems than assassinating Addison, Boris shoved hard against the ceiling with his broad back, trying to slow its descent. He strained his muscles so that his neck veins stood out like harp strings. He might as well have tried bench pressing a battleship. "Eddie, do it now!" screamed Addison. He gave up on all fours and lay flat on his belly as the cave ceiling bore down on him. "When you shout at me, it makes me not want to help you." "Eddie, pretty please with sugar on top, open the gate." "Not until you apologize." Finally, Boris filled his lungs with one last gasp of air and shouted, "Pull the release or I will skin you alive." After a moment's silence, Addison heard the release switch click into place. The ceiling stopped its dreadful march. With a grinding and scraping, the ceiling lifted upward, inch by inch, until the wind returned to Addison's lungs. The door slid open, revealing Eddie, smiling proudly. "Thank you, Eddie," said Addison weakly. "Well, don't say I never do anything for you." Eddie marched into the chamber, absent-mindedly stepped on the pressure sensor, and immediately triggered the death trap again. The team hurtled for the exit. Addison appreciated that Boris decided to run in the same direction this time. What he did not appreciate was when Boris grabbed Addison by the leg, sending them both crashing to the ground. He watched the rest of his team safely escape the chamber. The ceiling continued crushing down with the stone door grinding shut. Addison kicked his leg but could not detach himself from Boris. He had only seconds left before the door was sealed tight. In desperation, Addison took Sir Frederick's helm and tossed it down the tunnel past Boris. The big Russian released Addison and lunged for the relic. Addison, now in possession of both his legs, scrambled through the closing door. It clamped on his back like a pair of jaws. Raj, Molly, and Eddie grabbed Addison by his arms and yanked him out like a loose tooth. He rolled free, and the great stone door ground shut. Addison dusted himself off. He was going to thank everyone, but was distracted by Boris Rhaegar's screams from beyond the door. "The helmet!" said Molly. "Addison, we don't know the clue yet, and it's about to be crushed into scrap metal." Addison was aghast. "Molly, you're not suggesting we let Boris out of there." "Of course I am. We're archaeologists, not murderers." We've already killed one Rhaegar brother," Eddie pointed out. Addison wasn't sure how many Rhaegar brothers he needed on his conscience. He listened to the Russian's desperate shouts as the passageway slowly crushed him. Addison grimaced. He stepped firmly onto the white granite threshold, and the trap reversed course, opening the stone door and releasing the Vore gang member. Boris crawled out of the corridor, clutching Sir Frederick's helm. He passed a few seconds on his hands and knees, catching his breath. Once his hands stopped shaking, he clambered to his feet, rising to his full height. "Okay, now I am going to kill you." "But we just saved your life," said Molly. "That is your mistake, not mine," said Boris. For such a big man, he moved with the light grace of a ballet dancer and was now blocking Addison's group from escaping the chamber. There was no way past him, and Addison was not keen on stepping back into the death trap. Boris closed in. Addison had nowhere to move his feet, so he moved his mouth instead. "How did you find these caves?" Boris stretched his arms wide, filling the tunnel, and circled in on Addison. "For 20 yuan, a camel trader told me he saw you in the cantina. Then I questioned the cantina owner with these 2 fists." Boris held up his 2 fists for clarity. Addison felt he had a score to settle with this camel trader, provided he could survive his present conversation with Boris. "What does Malazar want with the Khan's treasure?" he asked, just to keep Boris talking. The gang member continued bobbing and weaving, waiting for Addison to slip within striking range. "Malazar does not care about the treasure. He'll sell it for profit. He only cares about the golden whip." "Why?" "The last Templar wins the prize." "What prize?" "The prize, boy! Hasn't your uncle told you the prophecy?" Addison was now thoroughly confused. He had heard about this prophecy from Rhaegar's brother in Peru, and it hadn't made any sense to him then either. "Here's a prophecy," said Raj, popping up behind Boris. "You're about to get hit on the head." Raj swung his backpack at Boris and put his full weight behind it. Unfortunately, Raj's full weight wasn't all that much. When Boris ducked easily, the momentum of Raj's backpack sent him sailing off his feet. Boris swung out with his left hand, the one that happened to be clutching Sir Frederick's steel helmet. He walloped Addison in the stomach so hard it knocked the wind out of him. "This is it," thought Addison, since he couldn't speak. "I'm about to be pummeled to death by a man wearing stolen pants." He waited for an earth-shattering punch that would reorganize the general layout of his face. It never came. Tony Chin dashed into the corridor at full speed and attacked the big Russian with a blinding flurry of kicks and punches. Stunned, Boris retreated, raising his fist to shield his head. Tony, I could hug you," gasped Addison. "Don't even think of it," said Tony. He rained punches down on Boris so rapidly, Boris barely noticed when Tony stole the helmet. Unfortunately for Tony, Boris was a thick-boned, milk-fed, and extremely difficult to injure. Tony seemed to realize he might have better luck beating up a dump truck. Boris lowered into a wrestler's crouch and charged, mashing Tony against a rock wall and nearly flattening Eddie in the process. Tony discovered that holding Sir Frederick's helm meant he could only fight one-handed, and fighting Boris, like eating lobster, was an activity that required 2 hands. Tony set the helm down on a rocky ledge to deliver a 2-fisted punch to Boris's concrete jaw. When he turned back to pick up the helm, it was gone. I wonder who took it.